I found an old family photo album in the attic, but when I opened it, half the pictures were missing. Later, my uncle admitted he had removed them on purpose. Because one person in those photos wasn't supposed to exist in our family at all. I'm writing this because I need to get it out, because 3 months ago, I know I was a decent man with a normal family. Now I know I'm the reason my wife tried to erase herself from existence. It started when I was cleaning out my late father's attic. Sarah, my wife of 8 years, was downstairs with our twins, Maya and Nathan, both 7. I could hear them laughing about something on YouTube. Normal family sounds. The kind I took for granted. That's when I found the photo album wedged behind an old dresser. Thick, leather-bound thing with FMML Memorize, embossed in gold. I figured it was Dad's collection from when he was younger. But when I opened it, my went cold. Half the photos were missing. Not lost, carefully removed. Could see the corner remnants where they'd been peeled away from the adhesive pages. What remained told a story I wasn't prepared for. There was Sarah at our wedding, but someone had been out of everywhere. She stood next to another person. There was Sarah pregnant with the twins, but again, surgical removals where someone else should have been. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, family barbecues. All butchered. The photos that remained showed Sarah looking different, hollow. Like she was performing happiness rather than feeling it. I called my Uncle Pete immediately. He's Dad's younger brother, the family historian who organized all our gatherings. Pete, I found this weird photo album in Dad's attic. Looks like someone went through it with scissors. Long pause. Then, which album? Says family memories on the front. There are pictures of Sarah and the kids, but Jesus, Danny. I told Father to throw that thing away. My hands started shaking. What are talking about? Meet me at Denny's on Route 9. Don't bring Sarah. That drive to Denny's was the longest 20 minutes of my. I kept thinking about Sarah's behavior over the past year. How she'd gotten quiet. How she flinched when I touched her sometimes. How she'd started seeing a therapist and wouldn't tell me why. Pete was already in a corner booth looking like he'd aged 5 years since Christmas. He ordered us both coffee and stared at his hands. The person who got removed from those photos. He said finally, was I laughed. Actually laughed. That's impossible. Those are my family photos. No, Danny. Those are Sarah's photos from her perspective. He pulled out his phone and showed me a picture I recognized. Our 5th wedding anniversary party. In the album version, Sarah stood alone by the cake smiling at nothing. In Pete's phone version, I was right there next to her, my arm around her waist, grinning like an. But in Pete's version there was something else. Something that made my stomach drop. I was looking at another woman, not Sarah, some blonde I didn't immediately recognize. And my expression, it wasn't the look of devout husband at his anniversary party. Sarah gave me that album 2 years ago, Pete said quietly. Asked me to hold on to it, said she was documenting her truth. Her truth. The truth about who really were during marriage. She'd spent months going through every family photo, every vacation picture, every milestone moment. Removing from the ones where we're distracted. The blonde, suddenly I remembered her. Melissa from my office. We'd started as work friends, then coffee friends, then text all day friends. Never crossed a physical line, but how many photos did she remove me from? Pete's eyes wormed. Danny. Most of them. That's when I realized the real horror. Sarah hadn't been documenting infidelity, she'd been documenting invisibility. All those moments where I was physically present but emotionally somewhere else. Where I was looking at my phone instead of my kids. Where I was thinking about another woman instead of my wife. The album wasn't evidence of cheating. It was evidence of abandonment. She left copies of everything with me, Pete continued. Said if something happened to her, someone needed to know the real story. How lonely she'd been. How hard she'd tried to get attention back. I drove home in a daze. Sarah was in the kitchen making dinner, humming softly. The twins were setting the table, bickering about whose turn it was to fold napkins. Everything looked normal. Everything looked perfect. But now I could see what Sarah had been documenting. I wasn't really there. Even standing in my own kitchen, I was already pulling out my phone, already thinking about tomorrow's presentation, already anywhere but present with my family. How was Dad's attic? Sarah asked, not looking from the stove. Fine. I lied. Just old junk. She nodded. And in that nod I saw years of disappointment she'd learned to swallow. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Sarah slept on her side, facing away from me, and for the first time I wondered how long she'd been doing that. How many nights had I been too distracted to notice my wife turning away from me in our own bed? I thought about Melissa. About our text conversations that went until midnight while Sarah washed dishes alone downstairs. About the way I'd light when Melissa's name appeared on my screen. The same way I used to light when Sarah walked into a room. When had I stopped seeing Sarah? When had I started looking right through the woman who gave me everything? The photo album was still in my car. Tomorrow I'd have to decide whether to confront Sarah about it, or pretend I never found it. But tonight, lying there in the dark, I finally understood what those missing photos meant. I hadn't cheated on my wife with another woman. I'd cheated on my wife with my own indifference. I brought the album inside the next morning. Sarah was at the kitchen table, helping Maya with math homework while Ethan built something with Legos on the floor. Saturday morning routine, the kind of scene that should feel peaceful. Instead I felt like I was about to detonate in the middle of our. Sarah, can we talk? She looked, saw the album in my hands, and I watched her face drain of color. Ethan, Maya, go play upstairs for a bit, she said quietly. But Mom, I'm not done with. Upstairs now. The kids scrambled away, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Sarah sat very still, hands folded in her lap. I placed the album on the table between us. Pete told me everything. She stared at the album like it was a snake. I didn't think to find it. Why Sarah? Why did make this? When she looked, her eyes were already filled with tears. But not the kind of tears I expected, not guilty tears, tired tears. Because I was disappearing, she said simply. And I needed proof that I had existed. I opened the album to a random page. Christmas morning, 3 years ago. In this version I'd been out, leaving Sarah alone with the kids around the tree. But I remembered that morning. I'd been there, taking pictures, participating. I was right here, I said, pointing to the empty space where I should have been. No, Danny, weren't. She stood and grabbed her laptop from the counter. A few clicks and she was showing me the original version of that same Christmas photo. There I was in the background looking at my phone while the kids opened presents. We're physically present, she said. But weren't with us, hadn't been with us for years. She clicked to another photo. Our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. In the original I was sitting across from her, but my eyes were focused over her shoulder, tracking the waitress who looked remarkably like Melissa. I started documenting it after I realized I could predict behavior, Sarah continued. When we'd go somewhere, I knew'd find someone else to look at within 10 minutes. When we'd have family time, I knew phone would buzz and light in a way hadn't for me in years. My throat felt tight. It wasn't like that. Show me one photo from the last 3 years where looking at me the way you used to. I flipped through the album. Page after page of Sarah with holes around her. Sarah at Maya's school play alone in the audience. Sarah at Ethan's baseball games cheering by herself. Sarah at my company Christmas party, standing by the wall while I networked with colleagues and lingered too long talking to the younger women in marketing. Every photo told the same story. Wife abandoned in plain sight. The therapist asked me to document my feelings, Sarah said. So I started taking pictures, not to catch cheating, but to show her why I felt invisible in my own marriage. She pulled a photo on her laptop that made my chest tighten. It was from last month's barbecue at Pete's house. Sarah was in the foreground, holding both twins, laughing at something Maya was saying. But in the background, clearly visible, I was deep in conversation with Pete's neighbor's daughter, a college girl home for summer break. I wasn't. We're 40, 3 years old Danny, flirting with a 21-old at a family barbecue while wife chased children around alone. The worst part was I couldn't deny it. I remembered that conversation. How alive I'd felt talking to someone who thought I was interesting, who laughed at my jokes, who didn't know about my receding hairline or my dad or the fact that I left dirty dishes in the sink. I never touched anyone else, I said weakly. Didn't have to. Left me emotionally years ago. I just documented the evidence. She closed the laptop and sat back down across from me. We stared at each other across the table, and I realized this was probably the longest eye contact we'd maintained in months. The album was supposed to be for my therapist, she said, to help me understand why I felt so lonely. But then I realized it was really for someday, when wondered why I left. Did have proof of who chose to be left. The word hit me like ice water. Sarah, or not. I already talked to a lawyer, Danny. The kitchen went silent except for the sound of the kids playing upstairs. Normal sounds from that was apparently ending. I wanted to wait until after Christmas, she continued, for the kids. But since found the album, I felt something breaking inside my chest. Not just the shock of divorce, but the realization of how completely I'd failed. How thoroughly I'd abandoned the woman I'd promised to love and cherish. I can change, I said desperately. I can be present, I can. Can't change what already happened. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at our backyard where the kids' swing set sat unused because I'd been too busy to push them lately. Do you know what the worst part was? She asked without turning around. It wasn't that fell out of love with me. It was that fell out of love with our family. Come home every day looking disappointed like we were some consolation prize it settled for. I wanted to argue, but every word she said landed with the weight of truth. I kept trying to win back, she continued. Lost 20 pounds, bought new clothes, suggested date nights, romantic getaways. But nothing worked because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that decided our marriage was boring. She turned around, and I saw a resolve in her eyes I'd never seen before. I spent 2 years trying to become someone, notice again. The therapy helped me realize I was trying to become someone else entirely. That's when I made the album, to remember who I actually was before I disappeared completely. The front door opened and closed. Pete walked into the kitchen without knocking, the way family does. I figured need this back, he said, setting a cardboard box on the table. Sarah asked me to give it after found the album. Inside the box were hundreds of photos, all the pictures Sarah had removed from the album. Every moment where I'd been physically present but emotionally absent. Every instance of me looking elsewhere, thinking elsewhere, being elsewhere. I kept them, Sarah said, cause they're still memories of our family, even if they're memories of how it fell apart. Looking through those photos was like watching a slow motion car crash, the deterioration of my marriage documented in real time. Wedding photos where I looked happy, first year photos where I looked content. Then gradually year by year the light going out of my eyes as routine replaced romance, as familiarity bred not contempt but indifference. And in every single photo Sarah was looking at me with hope. Waiting for me to look back. By the time I reached the bottom of the box I was crying. Not just sad crying but the kind of deep body shaking sobs that come when realize I've destroyed something irreplaceable through sheer negligence. The kids don't know yet, Sarah said gently. I want to tell them together. Tanaya nodded, unable to speak. Pete squeezed my shoulder. I'm sorry nephew. But she gave every chance. After he left, Sarah and I sat in our kitchen in silence. Upstairs Maya and Ethan were still playing, oblivious to the fact that their world was about to shatter. I loved, Sarah said finally. I loved so much I was willing to disappear rather than make choose between me and whatever we're looking for out there. I wasn't looking for anything, I managed to say. Yes we're. Just never figured out what it was. That evening we sat the twins down in the living room. Sarah did most of the talking while I tried not to fall apart completely. The kids asked questions I didn't have answers for. Maya wanted to know if it was her fault. Ethan asked if I was going to live somewhere else. Daddy made some mistakes, Sarah explained, and now we need to live apart for a while so everyone can figure out how to be happy again. But looking at my children's confused, heartbroken faces I knew there was no path back to happiness. Not for them, not for Sarah, and definitely not for me. That night I packed a bag and drove to a hotel. In the rearview mirror, I could see our house getting smaller, the warm windows growing distant. I'd been emotionally absent from my family for years. Now I was about to become physically absent too. 6 months later I'm sitting in a studio apartment that smells like other people's failures, writing this because the silence is me. The divorce was finalized last week. Sarah kept the house, the kids, and every photo that had me in it. I kept the debt, the guilt, and in every other weekend visitation schedule that feels like supervised mourning. The worst part isn't the loneliness, it's the clarity. Now that I've lost everything, I can see exactly how I lost it. It's like being given perfect vision after years of stumbling around blind. Except the only thing to see clearly is the wreckage created. Maya won't look at me during our visits. She's 8 now, old enough to understand that daddy didn't just make mistakes. Daddy chose to love other things more than his family. She draws pictures at the kitchen table while I sit there trying to make conversation, and in every single drawing, our family has 3 people in it. Ethan asks when I'm coming home every time I drop them off. Soon, I keep lying, because I can't explain that home isn't a place anymore. Home was Sarah making coffee in her pajamas on Sunday mornings. Home was Maya reading to her stuffed animals in maid voices. Home was Ethan bringing me his broken toys because he believed I could fix anything. Home was a woman who loved me enough to document her own disappearance rather than force me to choose. I found Melissa on Facebook last week. She's engaged to some guy from her yoga class. In all her photos, he's looking directly at her with the kind of attention I used to give Sarah before I forgot how. They look happy in that effortless way Sarah and I used to look happy, back when happiness felt like breathing instead of work. I never even asked Melissa out. Never her. Never did anything that would legally count as infidelity. But I gave her the emotional energy that belonged to my wife. I lit for text from a woman who wasn't my partner. I fantasized about conversations with someone who didn't know my flaws, didn't live with my bad habits, didn't depend on me for anything real. I had an emotional affair with the idea of escape, and Sarah paid the price. The therapist I'm seeing now's court-ordered, part of the custody agreement calls it emotional negligence. She says I grieved my single so thoroughly that I forgot to live my married, that I was so focused on what I'd given that I couldn't see what I'd gained. Men like, she told me during our 3rd session, treat marriage like a loss instead of a choice. Mourn freedom instead of celebrating partnership. And eventually that mourning becomes abandonment. Last month, Sarah started dating someone. Pete told me accidentally, then tried to take it back, but I'd already heard enough. He's a teacher at the kid's school, divorced, 2 kids of his own. In the photo Pete showed me then quickly hid. Sarah looks relaxed in a way I haven't seen in years. The man is looking at her the way I used to look at her. Back when I thought she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Back when I was present enough to see her at all. The kids like him. Maya draws pictures with 5 people in them now. Ethan calls him Mr. Trier. James, with the kind of respect he used to reserve for me. They're building something new while I sit in this apartment, surrounded by takeout containers and regret, finally understanding what I weigh. Sarah sent me a letter last week. Not through lawyers, just a handwritten note in an envelope with my name on it. I've read it probably 50 times. Danny, I wanted to know that I don't. Think I should, but I don't. What did wasn't evil, it was just absent. Didn't choose to us, just chose not to fully choose us. I hope someday find whatever it was we're looking for, and I hope it makes happy. But more than that, I hope learn how to be present for whoever loves next. How to see them, how to stay. Sarah. The thing is, I know exactly what I was looking for now. I was looking for the feeling of being desired by someone who didn't know me well enough to be disappointed. I was looking for conversations that felt effortless because they had no real stakes. I was looking for the excitement of potential instead of the steady warmth of reality. I was looking for a fantasy of connection instead of doing the work of actual connection. Sarah was right there, trying to love me back too. And I was so busy scanning the horizon for something better that I forgot to look down at what was already in my hands. The photo album sits on my kitchen counter now. Sarah gave it back to me the day she moved in with James. Said I needed to remember what absence looks like so I'd recognize presence when I found it again. Every night I flipped through those pages. Sarah at Maya's recital, alone in the audience while I worked late. Sarah at Ethan's birthday party, cake by herself while I answered emails in the backyard. Sarah at our anniversary dinner, smiling at a husband who was already mentally composing his next text to another woman. Hundreds of photos of a woman slowly disappearing from her own, because her husband had already disappeared from his. I keep thinking about that last photo in the album. Sarah and the kids at last year's Christmas morning. The 3 of them wrapped in a blanket on the couch, watching a movie. The empty space where I should have been is so obvious it looks intentional, like negative space in art that draws attention to what's missing. But I wasn't missing by accident, I was missing by choice. I chose my phone over my family. I chose fantasy over reality. I chose the thrill of what if over the substance of what is. I chose to be a ghost in my own, and now I haunt an empty apartment instead of a full house. Last week, Maya asked me why I never looked at her the way Mr. James looks at Mommy. She's 8 years old, and she's already learned that love is supposed to include attention. That presence is supposed to mean more than just being in the same room. I didn't have an answer that would make sense to a child, so I just said I was sorry. "It's okay, Daddy," she said, patting my hand with the kind of forgiveness that broke my heart. Can practice looking at people better. But the person I needed to practice with is building anew now. Teaching someone else's children how to ride bikes in the driveway that used to be mine. Laughing at someone else's jokes across the kitchen table where I used to sit. Falling asleep next to someone who looks at her like she hung the moon, instead of someone who forgot to look at her at all. I had everything a man could want, and I lost it all because I spent 8 years looking everywhere except where I was. Now I'm finally paying attention, but the only thing left to see is the space where my family used to be. The cruelest part is that I know exactly how to love someone now. I just learned it too late to love them.